Hey, I'm Alex Ratcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Apex Legends from Glass Cannon Unplugged. Apex Legends is a 2 to 4 player skirmish game set in the world of Apex Legends, the fairly famous video game, and this over here, this is a prototype, all rules, components, subject to change, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. This is a 2 to 4 player skirmish game. There are a variety of play modes. For the sake of teaching the game, I'm going to teach you the basic deathmatch and all that, but there's a bunch of modes of capturing various points, team play, all these different things you can go into. You can check the crowdfunding campaign. There's a bunch of modes there, as well as things I believe still being unlocked as far as those go, but I'm going to focus on the core mechanics of the game, and then those core mechanics are in play for the variety of modes. But like I said already, this is a skirmish game. This is a game that's mimicking the first player shooter of Battle Royale, in which the map is slowly closing around you, and you will have the map closing around you in this game. Despite being on this board over here, you're slowly going to have different bandwidth slowly moving down to enclose the area so that you're in a smaller and smaller area as these slowly close around the players. So it does have that mimicking of the Battle Royale, the fighting in a, what's the word for it, a knife fight in a phone booth? Is that what the expression is? I'm not entirely sure what it is. But either way, you have the players over here facing off against each other. Depending on the player count, depending on which game you have, there's a variety of player counts you can go at each other. Anything from as low as 1 to 1, although I don't imagine that would be quite as compelling, all the way up to, I just don't even know if it goes higher than that, but you can easily play 3 players against 3 players in this. But the general idea is playing against other players, trying to take them down by wandering across the map, gathering various upgrades, using your gear, and taking the right actions in the game to drive yourself forward in a way that has you taking down your opponents before you take them down. Again, a bunch of play modes, but the basic deathmatch is going to involve you have to take down at least one person on the, you have to take down each of the players on the other team. So if you're playing a 2 versus 2, you have to kill each of the person on the opposing team before they kill you. And along the way, you're going to have this board over here, which is lots of things are off camera just for table space. But you're going to have this board over here that shows you the number of rounds, the things that happen over here. You're going to have the map slowly closing around you. You're going to be using this deck of cards to show that whenever you hit that third spot over there, you're going to have the board closing around from different sides. So the way the map condenses around the players is going to change game to game, forcing you to evaluate how you need to adapt to that, lest you start taking damage, 10 and then eventually 15 per player on a regular basis as you go through it. Past that in the game, you're taking a cycle. You're going to have the team going and then moving around this board as you take the various actions, red, then blue, then a mid-round maintenance phase, then red, then blue, looping around and around as you go through those action phases, taking the player's actions. See, on your turn, each character has 2 actions to take. The actions they can take, they're all on this handy-dandy player aid, but the actions you can take are going to often involve moving around the board, which is as simple as moving around from location to location, moving diagonally if you need to, wandering around to try to get what you need. You can spend 2 movement points to move up 1 elevation. You can never jump up 2 elevation, but you can go from over here on the bottom of the board. For 2 movement points, you can jump up 1 elevation. You can, for another 2 movement points, you can jump up another elevation as you go through it. And then at any point, you can simply walk down the elevation down to the bottom ground. So you're managing this board over here as you wander around the locations, using the elevation to your advantage, using the locations to your advantage, and being mindful of any number of things which we're going to get to, the various powers and abilities. There are a lot of power abilities to manage. That's basically movement. A standard move 2 action is you move 2 spots. It takes 2 movement to move up 1 level of elevation, and that's basically what you need to know there. Or to wander over. If you want to jump over an obstacle like something like that, that would also take 2 movement as well. Past that, you have additional actions. Speaking of these obstacles over here, speaking of these little loot crates, so to speak, I don't think they're called loot crates, but the supply crates or whatever they're called, when you have these over here, you can also take an action where you interact and move in any order. So for example, I could open this crate, taking the various goodies in it, and then move away to try to do what I need to do next. So, and the crates are going to have any number of things from various mods for your weapons. You see, you're going to have weapons in the game. Let me show you a weapon over here. You're going to have a weapon in the game, and the weapon has the amount of ammo it starts with. It also has the various stats. So for example, over here we have the ideal range, and you can shoot outside the ideal range, but then you start taking a hit to your accuracy and how likely you are to actually hit. You also have how many cards you draw how many damage cards you draw, and each damage card is determining whether it's a hit or not. You have how many over here. You have the actual what you need to hit, which again is going to be modified if you're shooting outside the ideal range. And then lastly, you have the amount of damage it's doing, and more damage if it's a headshot. So you have those are the 4 factors you have going on a basic gun: range, how many damage cards, what each damage card hits on, and for example over there the damage and or headshot. So for example, let's take this situation on the board right now. Well, we have this player shooting this player directly on this top level over here. Just they're 2 apart, and they're going to go ahead and attack each other. In that case, we're going to look at this card. We have 2 range, so we are going to be doing exactly what it says there. We're going to be going ahead and drawing 4 damage cards. I'm going to start from the basic zone of 0. Sometimes you can do things to increase that. For example, we have stability as a modified perk on this weapon. This stability means we're actually going to move 2 to the left over here in order to be able to have a slightly more accurate shot because of that card. Over here, we're going to draw an extra damage card because we have an extended magazine, so we can shoot more, well, bullets. And then lastly, we have the extra damage that's going to do because it has these shotgun bolt bullets. That means it's going to be doing 6 damage instead of 4. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and draw 5 cards, starting from 2 over here. We have 20. That's going to be a miss because we need that 40 to actually hit, and 20 is not enough, although we do have the half symbol, which might come up later. We actually have the other half symbol right over there as we go through it, which means even though both these are misses, together they are actually combine a hit. Then we have over here, we have 70. 70 is going to be another hit, so we so far have 1 hit from these. We're going to slide this down to show we have not 1 hit there. We have a hit over here. We have the 70, which is a hit and a headshot. Then we're going to go ahead and shuffle this. We have a 75, which is another hit over there without the headshot. And then lastly, we have the 30 over here, which is going to, unfortunately, because it's negative 10, that brings it down to 20. You can see how these get modified, that as you shoot more and more, you have less and less accuracy. And so the net result of this is we lose this as a hit, which means we have 3 hits and 1 headshot at 6 damage apiece because of the plus 2. That's 18 plus the 2 for the headshot is 20 damage to your opponent. From there, you're going to go ahead and grab their shields over here. So we have their shields, where you have a little card with their shields and health. You're going to hit their shields first in most cases. Things like the raw damage of the perimeter closing in on you is going to hit your health first. But for the most part, things will go through your shields. And so we're going to go ahead and lower that by 20. And now we have 40 health and 10 shields left on this person. That's the basic idea of how a shoot action plays out. You're going to go ahead and take a shoot action. You're going to look at your weapon stats. You're going to shuffle up the modifier cards again as you go through it. But ultimately, you're trying to combine the various actions you need to try to take down your opponent, to find that exact moment of where you have to move, where you have to end up, what you have to open up. Meanwhile, you can see now the appeal of opening these various crates over here because you're going to get more and more perks. There's different levels of perks in the game, and the better perks are going to give you better things. Maybe you get stability plus 3. Maybe you're doing 3 extra damage. Maybe you're drawing 2 extra cards, or any number of other things that modify your accuracy. There's a ton of different perks you can add to the various weapons, and there's a giant stack of weapons over here. This is just like a small sampling of the various weapons in the game, just going through it. There's like 50 plus weapons, and I don't know what's being unlocked in the crowdfunding campaign and all of that, but that's basically what's going on as far as the shoot action. From there, you can also use various items. In the game, you're also going to have a ton of items you have access to. There's crates full of various items over here, and you're gonna have different things like grenades you can shoot, grenades you can throw at your opponent, various types of grenades, EMP grenades, damage grenades, all kinds of different things. You're going to have players using their cars and equipment. You see, all the players in the game are going to have their own unique roles and kits, effectively, the kit that character has. And that kit's going to give you any number of different options or items or things that can increase your movement. You can have you teleporting across the board. You can have one of my favorite things, which is this strafing missile situation, which you put down this missile on the board, you orient this part over here, you put down the missile on the board, and this is going to start a strafing run across 2 turns. We're going to have this dealing a whole row of damage over here, and then moving again 1, 2, 3, and then again dealing a whole row of damage again. It's effectively a strafing missile across the board, hurting your opponents. But things like that are going to be time-based effects that go into play. You're going to have a lot of time-based effects that show up on the board, so that you know that when you drop this explosion here, this is covering fire, it's going to provide a giant ring of dropping fire on the board, which can be incredibly impactful when you're trying to pin down an opponent in a corner and you don't want them running out, and this can stop them running out, or alternatively, you can let them run out, but do so at the cost of both their actions, meaning they can get out of a tight situation, but they can't actually do anything to you negatively along the way. You're going to be throwing the protective domes on top of you as well as you go through it. This is chock full of equipment, the various, gas little areas here, protective domes. You have all these different realms of equipment that will go on the board, modifying the board state, protecting or affecting or dealing damage to various enemies along the way, because all the players have their own kits and hand of cards. You're going to be drawing from hand of cards. You're going to start with hand of cards and be drawing as you go through the round, and those cards will give you different modifications as well, reactions to various abilities. Someone tries to shoot you and you zip out of the way, and you can take a negative modifier to your first hit and avoid all subsequent hits. Or alternatively, you go ahead and you have a protective person jump in front of your ally, taking the hit for them, stopping them from taking a weaker amount of damage. There's all these kinds of cards you have that are reaction based. There's boost cards. I think they're called boost cards. They are rush cards that are all cards have a little rush element on the bottom, where it gives you a little bit of extra movement to get where you need to go by discarding the card, and you can use that as a free action, which might help you get out of a tight situation. Again, if you're currently involved in this defensive fire, this covering fire, it might be the thing you need to get out of a tough spot. The cards are full of abilities you're going to have. The characters have abilities in their own kits, and then of course the items that you're going to have, the various gear and the weapons and the way you're going to upgrade those are going to give you a ton more to be mindful of as you go through this. But the basic idea is on your turn you take 2 actions. You may take free actions as well. Lots of these actions are free actions, like dropping your covering fire might be a free action in the game. You're going to be taking the actions to move around the board, to try to go ahead and to open up these various loot crates, to interact, to deal with people. You can do melee attacks. So over here, you can go ahead and do a melee attack to knock him off the board. It won't do that much damage, but it'll knock him off the building, meaning he'll have to spend a lot of time, effort, and energy to get back there. Or alternatively, if you knock them where they can't actually go, if you knock them when they can't move, they'll take additional damage as well. And so you have that aspect as well. You have all these different forms of the ways you're going to be drawing and dealing damage against your opponents as you go through the experience. That is basically what's happening in Apex Legends. There's a bunch of play modes to go through, but the basic idea is it's going to be an action-based system which players are going to be entering the map. We haven't talked about a lot of side rules, like the idea that as you enter the map, you're going to have a sideboard over here where you choose different bonuses depending on where and how you enter the map, different extra upgrades or bonus movement or things like that as you go through. You're going to be entering the map, trying to be mindful of the objectives you're trying to accomplish, whether you're trying to hold different areas turn to turn so you can get points, or whether you're trying to just simply take out your opponents as much as possible. And then from there, you're trying to be mindful of the clock as the map slowly shrinks around you as you go through it, as you try to take out your opponents, tactically outmaneuvering them as you go through Apex Legends. Which brings us to the review, starting off with ease of play. This game is... There's a lot of edge cases to be mindful, lots of things you have to know in order to go through the game. The game itself is not that hard to go through. I believe they have a 20-minute tutorial video that mostly covers almost everything you need to go through in the experience. The game is, the core sequence you take turn to turn is very easy. This core sequence is all on the player aid, and it's incredible. This is a great player aid. It covers absolutely everything you need to know as far as the core, what do you do on your turn, and what are the core actions you're taking. Things like how fire resolves, very easy. There's just a lot of side rules you kind of have to know about how you're tracking like, every side little thing. That's where if you have one person managing the game, you're good to go. But I can, if I'm managing the game, I can get one person up and running on this fairly quickly, maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes to get you understanding what's going on, then do a round of play, quick reset, and then dive into it. It's not that complicated a game, but it gives you a lot of depth and strategy in terms of the amount of things you can do rather than how the game actually operates. Games can range very, very widely depending on the player mode, depending on how defensive players are being, depending on any number of different things you're doing, the characters you're playing, if you're playing a 2 versus 2 versus 3 versus 3, there are so many things you can do as far as how that will affect the game time of this. I would say generally you're looking at anywhere from 45 minutes, maybe even half an hour. You can knock out a game in half an hour if you're aggressive enough. I'd say anywhere between half an hour to like 2 hours. There's a wide range, but it depends on what you're diving into. I think for the most part you'll know what you're diving into and have that, but it's not as simple, hey, this is an hour-long game. It's much more complicated than that. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I like, which is first of all the amount of abilities and just interesting things that are happening here. This at the core of the actual game, you're taking actions, you're moving around, you're doing things. It's a skirmish game. Congratulations, it's a skirmish game. There's a million skirmish game. What makes any skirmish game stand out from another? And one of the things that this does, and it's worth noting by the way, I've played Apex Legends way back in the day. When it first came out, I played it briefly, didn't stick with it that long, and I don't remember that much about it. So I can't speak to how well they capture the characters. I can speak to the fact that the board shrinking is a nice little element that makes it feel like a battle royale game. Past that, it feels like a skirmish game where you're taking actions, you're shooting people, you're not really rolling dice, you instead have a stability row where your weapon's like jittering up as trying to shoot people. So it has a lot of things that work well, but I can't speak to how well it captures the feel of Apex Legends because I haven't played it in a long, long time. But what I can say is I love the powers and abilities of the characters and how each character feels vastly, vastly different. They are completely different. Each character brings his own kit and puzzle to the table as far as how they operate, what they're good at, trying to find their tactical advantages and what you can, how and when to use their items. It's so tempting to use every piece of gear as soon as you have access to. But if you use it right away, you'll get it back sooner. But if you save it for the right moment, it might be more impactful. That defensive fire, that covering fire can be hugely beneficial if you use it when someone's pinned down, you're trying to get one of your teammates out of a tough situation, you're trying to threaten one of theirs. There's tons of times where that can be incredibly beneficial, and there's other times where it's a minor annoyance to the team, to the opponents. You have to be mindful of this as you navigate every single character's high degree of asymmetry with their powers, with their abilities, with the interesting things being the guns. It's a totally different experience in terms of the weapon kits you try to pull together as far as how your weapons operate, what extras they have on them to boost their stats as much as possible. It's a game that does have a core concept at play, but the powers and abilities and different interesting things in the game system really enhance the experience significantly by just giving you more to consider. The first time I played this game, I was looking at my hand of cards for like 7 minutes on my first turn, trying to think through just what to do to try to get done what I need. There's so many options on the table, how you can move, what actions you can take. Do you open up a crate? Do you try to shoot your opponent? There are so many actions you can take in this game, and there's just a lot to consider. I like the reaction cards as well. The reactions give you a lot of control, but it depends on how and when you use them. And again, you're kind of tempted to use a reaction all the time, but if you save it for the right moment, that is a big part of the game experience, trying to figure out when the reaction is most damaging to your opponents. The closing grid is fun to deal with. Again, this whole battle royale aspect where the grid slowly condenses around the players as you go through it, that gives you a tighter and tighter battlefield. It's a fun feeling, and if you've ever played a battle royale game, it kind of has that tension as you can no longer wander around the board and instead you're head to head. We'll get to things that I don't like soon. There's a small aspect I don't like quite as much, but we'll talk about that soon enough. I'll say there's always a way to find that shot you need. It's just a question of what you're willing to give up to get that. I like this about the game. It really does feel, even at its fully exposed area where you have the full map, it still feels like to a certain degree you are in close quarters with one another. And yes, even though you're totally across the map and your weapon only shoots 4 and that other person's over here, if you're willing to use the right cards, if you're willing to do the right things, you can usually find a way. And if you, that may be a bad thing because you can always find a way to hit. What's the point of hiding? There's lots of points in hiding because what you choose to do on the board affects what your opponent has to give up in order to shoot you. Sure, of course I can shoot you, but I may have to discard 2 cards from my hand and no longer open that loot crate I was trying to open. And so supply drop, I think they're called supply drops. I could be wrong with that, but open the supply drop as well. So there's all these decisions that, sure, I can shoot you, but what do I have to give up to shoot you is part of the conversation. That placement on the board, the placement does matter, where you go, what elevation you're at, what you're hiding behind, all of those things matter as you're going through the experience. Getting weapon upgrades, that's another fun aspect. The weapon upgrades in the game, the ability to boost your weapon, it just gives you more fun things as you find ways to feel more powerful as you go through the experience. And the way the characters work together, the teams you put together, because of how highly asymmetric each character is, the teams you put together and the ways they're going to operate, different characters operating together are going to feel vastly different as you go through the game. You have different, just totally different approaches to the way each character runs, and the teamwork they'll provide in different combinations will be a huge degree of replayability in addition to the various modes of play. As far as things I don't like, there's 2 small things and 1 slightly bigger thing. The small things are, first of all, I kind of wish the grid closed in earlier. This grid over here, it closes in, but it closes in after 3 full rounds of play, which is a lot of time. That is a lot of time in the game. And sure, you know it's coming up, you have to react to it, but there are times where you can have a game that is over by the time you hit the 3 full rounds of play. And so the closing in grid is not always practically a thing, and even when it is a thing, you don't necessarily get the full experience out of it because you only get a partially closing. I like the closing grid. I wish it closed in faster or had more impact or gravitas to it. It's a good thing, but I really like the concept of it. But because it's a battle royale game, I want it to be in play every single game. I want it to be more impactful some games than others, but I always want it to be in play. If the game's over before the grid moves, it feels a drop less satisfying. And so that's one small little nitpick over there. It's a small nitpick because I think it's I don't know. I mean, this is a prototype. All complaints I ever have in a prototype review means they could be subject to change. Things do change in production and final whatever. So check out how it goes as far as that ends up. But I think even if it ends up this way, it's not the end of the world, but I definitely do wish it closed in a bit more. I'll also say that drawing weapons, and this is one that I know is a change. I know that they're currently changing this, but I also want to comment on my current experience because I don't know if my complaint is solved yet, but I'll talk about it. But basically, drawing weapons in the current state, getting those supply drops, while fun, is currently not something that is ever meaningful enough that I feel like that's a drive to do so over shooting my opponents. At the end of the day, getting those supply drops, opening those crates, getting a possible new weapon is potentially fun. But very often, I'll discard the weapon because the weapons I have are already good enough at what they're doing, and the weapon differences, they could be situationally beneficial, but there's not enough certainty that I'm going to get something that's useful that I rarely prioritize trying to get a new weapon in the game, which feels a little off for a game that is a battle royale game where you're running around the board trying to find new things. It feels a bit off that I'm not that excited to get new weapons. I am excited to get new attachments from weapons. That I'm excited about. But the weapons themselves, not quite as much. Now, I do know they are working on this. I do know they are aware of that problem, and they are already putting things into place. I'm 100% aware of that, but I haven't played with those new things, so I'm commenting both on my experience, because I experienced it, while also noting that they are addressing it, and so hopefully that won't be an issue in the future, but I can only say hopefully, because I haven't tried that. The last complaint is the one that, again, I'm curious whether things will or won't adjust. I don't know. And it's a very good system, but it takes a little bit away from the shooting element of the game. In this game, there's a ton of fun things. There's a ton of powers and abilities. A ton of, just throwing various, anything from grenades to strafing runs to just giant amounts of covering fire. There's so many abilities, teleports. There's so many things you do in this game that are just simply fun and make the game stand out from being a simple skirmish game and rather into an incredibly tactical puzzle of an experience. But the one thing I don't love quite as much is I don't love this number row for shooting. I think it makes sense mechanically, and I think it's brilliantly designed. But the full execution, by the time you go ahead and look at your weapon stats, by the time you modify it for whatever stats you have over here, by the time you run them over here and then take into account any forms of anything else, there are other things on the board that can affect that. By the time you do all that, it kind of feels more like a numbers game than, hey, I shot a gun and hit you. At the end of the day, sometimes, if you're playing a game, the question is how do you resolve a gun damage? And sometimes many games just have you rolling dice, and sometimes that's anticlimactic. I think when it comes to a gun, I think sometimes rolling dice is not necessarily the worst thing, and it gives you that kind of feel of just a scattering shot and seeing how things played out. But this system over here is very clever, and it doesn't bother me, but it takes a bit away from the experience of shooting a gun. It just feels like other things that you do in the game are incredibly cool, and shooting, which is one of the core actions you will do across the course of the game, is add up the stats, check it out, and then, yeah, sure, I did damage to you. The net result from starting the shooting to the end of the shooting, totally fine with. The process in between just feels a little tedious and a little less like just fun, if that makes sense. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, it can be hard to actually escape being shot. Meaning this is an attrition-based game. This is a game where you are slowly going to decline in your shields and your health until you eventually die and then respawn, and it's all about managing who can die faster or who can die less fast as you go through the experience. Because you can almost always have a situation where people can close the distance, can get the shots in, and they have to give things up along the way, and it's up to you to try to min-max that puzzle, but at the end of the day, you are going to slowly be getting hit and having your health slowly deplete until eventually, one team wins their goals. And again, it's not always deathmatch based, so it's different scenarios and all that will change how you experience it. I'll say that it can be very overwhelming and easy to miss things in the game. There's so much information. Even if I know your characters, and that's an additional aspect too, is how well do you know the characters at the table. If I've played as certain characters and you don't know those characters, and vice versa, we might be on even playing fields. But if I know how your characters operate and you don't know how mine operate, I am at an advantage. If I've played as I don't remember the names, unfortunately, there's Wraith. If I've played as Wraith and I know how to drop teleports around the field, and I know that you have a card that if I know that there is a card that Wraith has that will hurt you when you teleport, if I know those nuances of the game, that will affect how I interact with the game. And so someone who knows the characters on the table as they're walking in is at an advantage. And that's combined with the fact that even if you do know everything, there's just a lot of information. And that means that as you're looking through your hand, as you're trying to take turns, the plus side is there's so much strategic depth because it really does come down to trying to find the best puzzle with using all that information together. The downside is it can be overwhelming. It is a game that, again, I don't think of myself as a strongly AP prone player, an analysis paralysis prone where I take a long time on my turns, but my first game of this, I took a long time on my turns. There was so much going on as far as what's the best way to get to what I need in this game, considering so many options that it can be overwhelming if that's not your jam. As far as final thoughts on Apex Legends, the board game from Glass Cannon Unplugged, as far as final thoughts on this one, I really like it as it is with caveats. To me, this is a 4 out of 5. I enjoy the game. It's a good game. It gives me it's a good skirmish system that gives you a lot of fun things to do. It's not perfect in every way, but to me, the powers and abilities, the sheer amount of tactical choice you have in the game, all of those things are amazing. My biggest pet peeve, I have 3 small complaints, and one of them I know is going away, or I hope is going away. The other one I think is going away. And the third one regarding how the actual core combat mechanic works, that's the one where it's a big deal to an extent because it's the core way you shoot things, but it's also my only real complaint against the experience. Outside of that, everything here felt fun. Everything here felt challenging, and I'm excited to try the new characters and see the way new characters combine. I've only had a chance to play this as a 2 versus 2 in terms of the characters. I'd love to dive in as a 3 versus 3 to see the variety of modes that they have here. This is overall a lot of fun. I think it's a very solid experience. I will say, I forgot to mention, and the things I potentially don't like, these, if you have to assemble these every single time you play, that wouldn't be the most fun. Assembling these is great, they fit in the box, all that stuff, but it takes time to assemble the actual buildings over here, and so this is a game that I would probably have these set up in a different box so I don't have to assemble them, so take that into account as you go through it as well. But in any case, as far as other game recommendations, I'm going to give the first one over here is going to be, they're both going to be controversial-ish recommendations. The first is going to be Six Siege, which from Mythic Games, they have a history, they have issues right now, and so I'm torn between not wanting to necessarily recommend something that is a little bit more embroiled, but this game does feel very, very reminiscent to me of the Six Siege experience I had. And so take that as you will. If you like this game, maybe it's worth hunting down a copy of Six Siege one day. The alternative is, if you were really looking forward to Six Siege and you didn't get it, this game does feel very reminiscent. They are different enough in the experience that they give, while being similar enough in the experience that they give, that I think if you like one, you will probably like the other. And if you're looking for another big box, giant video game IP that is totally different than the way it plays, Call of Duty from Arcane Wonders. Call of Duty is a great game that I've only had a chance to play the prototype once so far, back in development, but overall that is going to be a totally different experience. But if you're just looking for a larger, what's called AAA shooters turned into board games, check out Call of Duty as well. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.